Sure, this is a transcription of your video content in Vietnamese, with timestamps removed and formatted into paragraphs for easier reading. This content tells two separate stories of disturbing experiences. Hello everyone, I'm Storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. I moved into this old building about 2 months ago. The rent is low and I like that it's right in the center of town. I think it will be convenient. At first, I didn't pay much attention to the creaky floors or the dim lighting in the hallway. It seemed like an ordinary, slightly run-down place that might just need a little care. But from the first week, something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that it was just me being nervous. But every night, around midnight or a little later, I feel like there's someone in the hallway. It doesn't start in the first week. I was busy unpacking, cleaning my belongings, and starting a new job. I barely had time to notice anything strange. But the second week, I started hearing those footsteps. I remember the first time it happened was around 12:30 a.m. I was lying on my little couch with the TV on. I heard a slow, steady sound outside my door. It was faint but sounded like real footsteps. There was a pause, then a creak, then another pause, then another creak. It reminded me of someone trying to walk without making a sound, except the floor in the hallway was so old that the wood cracked under any pressure. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor working late or something like that. I got up and opened the door to see who it was and found no one. The hallway lights were still on, but the place was empty. I walked a few steps outside. Nothing. I shrugged and closed the door. I thought to myself maybe the floor was moving or something in the old buildings was making strange noises. I went back to the couch and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling. The next night, I heard the same thing, but this time it started after 1 a.m. Still the same way, walking slowly, carefully as if someone was moving down the hallway. I walked to the door, opening it faster this time, hoping to catch someone. Again, nothing. There's no one in the hallway. I felt a chill run through my body, but I wasn't about to panic. I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that. I assumed it was the old wood or maybe someone on the floor above me. Sound can travel to older buildings and it can fool you. But that's odd. I almost didn't want to tell anyone about it because I knew what it would sound like. Paranoia. On the third night, I started to feel annoyed because it always happened after midnight, but not exactly at the same time, sometimes 12:15, sometimes an hour, sometimes later. I lost sleep. I lay on the bed waiting. The hallway is quite long and I live near the end, so anyone walking or anything making noise moves along the length of the hallway. I kept imagining someone pacing back and forth looking for the door number or some random person stumbling around, but the building was never crowded at that hour. I didn't hear any other noises except slow footsteps and the occasional bounce of the old floor. My heart started beating strongly. I stood up and pressed my ear to the door. The stairs continued to get closer, then stopped near my apartment. There will be silence for a few seconds and then they retreat the same way they came. It feels like some strange game, but every time I open the door, I see no one. One night, I decided I would be a little more methodical. I turned off all the lights in my place, sat in the dark and waited. Occasionally, I checked the time on my phone, and then it was around 12:40 when I heard footsteps. Softer at first, as if at the end of the hallway near the stairs leading to the lobby. They get bigger or maybe more pointed as they get closer. I pressed my ear to the door. I can hear every creak, every shift in the old boards. My heart was beating so loudly, I could barely hear what was going on. My palms were sweaty. I took a slow breath to calm down. Then the footsteps came to my door and stopped. I felt extreme tension in my chest, as if I was holding my breath even though I tried not to. For a split second, I didn't even blink. I expected a knock on the door, but nothing happened. I thought maybe I could see a shadow under the door, so I turned off the light in the small entryway behind me to see if there was any movement. But that hallway was so dark I couldn't see anything. The door had a small peephole, so I raised my eyes to look outside. I looked outside. The hallway light was still on, but I couldn't see anything. No silhouette, just empty darkness. Then, after maybe 5 or 10 seconds, I heard the footsteps again, returning the way they came. It was the exact opposite, a series of soft, slow, steady creaks moving away from me, back toward the stairs. I pressed my ear to the door again. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I listened until the footsteps faded, like they disappeared at the end of the hallway. I stood there feeling my heart pounding, my throat dry. I swallowed hard, opened the door with a crack and looked out. The hallway was empty. The lights were buzzing dimly. There were no people, no movement. I walked out for a second, didn't hear anything. The only thing I could hear was the faint hum from the elevator on the other end. After a minute, I gave up. I went back in, locked the door and tried to sleep. I can't relax. Every little sound makes me sit up. It was past 2 a.m. when I finally fell asleep. And the next morning, I felt exhausted. That routine continued for a while. Some nights I go to bed early hoping I can sleep no matter what is going on. I wake up around midnight or 1 a.m. anyway, startled by a dream or something small. Then I would wait, and sure enough, sometimes the footsteps would return. I considered the possibility that I was daydreaming and imagining things, but it was too real. I could feel the boards shaking under someone's weight. I decided to ask around. I talked to the manager, an older guy named Richard, who had a small office down the hall. I casually mentioned that I heard noises at night. He shrugged and said it was an old place, pipes banging in, wood expanding, all that. I nodded and said maybe that was it. I also spoke briefly to a neighbor who lived at the other end of the hallway. He is a quiet, middle-aged man with a slight limp. I asked him if he ever heard anything strange at night. He shook his head and said he usually slept like a rock. He didn't seem suspicious or anything. I tried bringing it up with a few other residents I met in the elevator, but most of them just smiled politely and changed the subject. One night, foolishly pushing the subject, I thought about setting up some kind of recording device. I have an old phone that I don't use anymore. I thought maybe I could leave it in the hallway recording and see what I caught. But I don't want someone to step on it or steal it. I'm also worried I'll turn into a paranoid person if I get caught messing around in the hallway that late. In the end, I didn't do it, unfortunately. Maybe I could have gotten proof of something. Instead, I just rely on my own observations. The noises started to become more frequent. Where once it was only a few times a week, it now happens almost every night. Sometimes I even hear them around 2 or 3 in the morning, always following a slow pattern. Walking from a distance, stopping in front of my house, then returning. I never heard any doors open or close. How strange. I wondered if it could be a neighbor locked out or an insomniac pacing the hallway. But it never made sense that they would stop on my doorstep, and I couldn't understand why I never came across them. I started to feel uncomfortable in my own home. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting, my body tensing up at the slightest sound. During the day I felt silly, but that night was a different story. My heart beat fast and I sweated a lot. My apartment isn't hot, but my body acts as if I'm in a sauna. On some nights, I just watch TV until 2 a.m. with the volume low, waiting for the sound of footsteps. They always come. One particular night, at its worst, it was late, around 1:30 a.m., and I was leaning against the door again, trying to catch something unusual. My ear pressed against the wood. I heard footsteps starting in the distance. They got bigger, and I felt my heart pounding. There was a faint hiss, then another, each consistent with the shift in weight. It sounded like a person wearing shoes with hard soles, taking light, deliberate steps, not by accident. They reached my door. I held my breath. For a split second, I thought I heard breathing on the other side, but I wasn't sure. My body was locked tight. My fingers were tingling. Then there was silence. After a while, the footsteps started moving again. Once they were gone, I realized I was shaking. I looked through the peephole. There was no one. That was the night I decided to sit on the floor right next to the door. I just sat with my back against the wood, trying to calm down. I can't believe this is happening. In my mind, I ran through a list of explanations. Perhaps a certain neighbor had a habit of sleepwalking, or perhaps the building's wooden floors were shifting due to heating ducts at odd hours. I try to rationalize it, but it keeps happening, and it's always the same. Same route, always the same time, always at my door. The manager kept telling me the same thing whenever I brought it up. Old floors, old pipes. He seems bored with me. I think he found me uncomfortable. I don't feel like he's hiding anything, he just doesn't think it's a problem. My lame neighbor just said, "Huh, never heard anything," and changed the subject. A few times, I thought I saw someone lingering in the stairwell as I left for work in the morning, but it turned out to be another tenant waiting for the car. I never found anyone suspicious. That's so annoying. As the weeks passed, I became so restless that every noise made me nervous. If my refrigerator made a clicking sound, I would freeze. If a car honks its horn outside, I flinch. My body feels like it's on constant alert. I have dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. People at work asked me if I was okay. I said I was just busy. I didn't want to be seen as a problem. Then one weekend, I thought maybe I could catch someone by surprise if I stayed out in the hallway. So around midnight, I turned off the lights in my apartment, opened the door very quietly, and walked into the hallway. I left the door unlocked behind me. The hallway lights were still on, but they were dim and flickered sometimes. I went to the far end where there was no one at the stairs. I crouched next to the wall, trying to stay still. The building remained quiet. I heard the elevator run a few times, but no one came down to my floor. After about an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. My legs cramped and I felt funny. I went back inside. Of course, that was the night when the footsteps didn't happen. I guess if it was a person, they had noticed me somehow, or it was all just random timing. I didn't try it again. Eventually, I got to the point where I tried to ignore it. If I hear footsteps, I stay in bed and let them pass. But ignoring it doesn't help. It actually makes me more anxious. I kept imagining someone standing on the other side of the door, staring in. That thought gave me chills. Sometimes I start shaking under the blanket. Sometimes I get up and check the lock again. One night, it was about 12:50 a.m. I heard the footsteps begin. I tried to keep myself in bed. They moved slowly along the hallway, just like always. I sweated so much that I had to push the blanket off. My heart was pounding. When they reached my door, they stopped. I could almost feel someone's presence through the door, as if I opened it, they would be right there. I listened, barely breathing. My mouth is dry. A few seconds later, the footsteps left. I heard them fade away. The hallway became silent. I didn't get up to check. I just lay there until morning, dozing off and on in the endless fog. And it happened like that a while later. These steps don't lead to anything else. They never tried to open the door for me. They never knocked. They never whispered or rattled anything. I just hear them coming and going. No one else seemed to notice or care. I couldn't find a reasonable explanation, but I also couldn't prove anything spooky was going on. I began to wonder if a certain eccentric neighbor had a reason to be out and about at those hours. Perhaps it was an elderly person with insomnia trying to move. Maybe it was the building's heating system that caused the wood to break in a sequence that sounded like footsteps. Maybe it was someone who was trapped. I still live here. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but every time I heard that sound, I tensed up, as if I was waiting for something bad to happen, even though nothing happened. Just footsteps coming and going, night after night, passing by my door. It's been a few weeks since the last one, but I don't feel any relief. I feel like it's only a matter of time before it happens again. I never found any clues in the hallway. I checked to see if there were any scratches or footprints on the worn tiles. Nothing unusual. I had knocked on a few neighbors' doors before just to ask if they had heard anything, and no one admitted it. I tried to tell myself that maybe I was the only one bothered by these sounds because my apartment was near the end of the hallway. Maybe the acoustics there were weird. All I know is that it's real enough to make my heart pound when I hear it. I don't have a solid explanation. It could be the neighbors, it could be the flooring, it could be a combination of things. I have no evidence that anything supernatural is actually going on. I doubt that is the case at all. I was convinced it was something or someone completely normal just acting strangely. But that didn't stop me from feeling uncomfortable. That long hallway, the dim lights and the series of footsteps in the dead of night, it was hard not to panic. When I talk about it, people often shrug their shoulders, but if they've experienced it themselves, maybe they'll understand. I've been thinking about moving, But financially this place still makes sense for me. The rent is cheap and it's close to work. Plus, I kept thinking if I left I'd always wonder what the hell was really going on in that hallway. Now I deal with it. I always lock the door. I try to reduce the noise with a fan or some music while I'm in bed. Sometimes I wear earplugs, but on quiet nights I can still hear those footsteps. Nothing dramatic, just footsteps in an old building, coming and going without explanation. And to be honest, that alone makes me uncomfortable. That's the whole story. I wish I had some big reveal, proof that it was a joke or that there was a hidden passage in the wall, but I don't. All I have is the memory of sitting there, pressed against the door, hearing slow, deliberate footsteps on the other side, just inches away, without knowing who or what they belonged to. And so it happened. I heard it, I felt it, and I never realized it. I'm not saying it's supernatural, but late at night when my mind is racing, I can't help but imagine someone standing there in the darkness of that old hallway, listening to me breathe on the other side of the door, then disappearing as I look. It still makes my heart pound when I think about it. Story 2. The call in the hotel. I still remember my last night in that hotel. My body was exhausted and my mind was almost blank, but I couldn't really fall asleep. The room was too quiet, the bed was too hard, the air conditioner rattled a bit, and every time it started I woke up with a start. Feels like something is wrong. I was in that small city for a few days on high-profile work and the place was nothing fancy, just a decent hotel on a busy street. People were coming and going at all hours, but it was still quieter than I'm used to. At around midnight, I decided to force myself to go to sleep. I put my phone on vibrate, plugged it into the nightstand, and rolled over hoping to get enough rest before checking out in the morning. I don't know how tonight will turn out. I dozed off at some point, but it wasn't quiet. I kept looking at the clock on the bedside table. 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. Every little noise felt louder in that strange room. I hear the elevator going down the hall or someone's muffled cough in another room, and my brain refuses to relax. At about 3 a.m., I was in that strange semi-awake state, where you're aware of the darkness but not fully aware of your thoughts. When my cell phone started vibrating, it wasn't just a buzz, but the full vibration of an incoming call. I forced myself to open my eyes and raise my hand to the screen. The whole room lit up. I felt dazzled. That number is not in my contacts. I thought it might be a family member or a friend calling in an emergency, because who else would call at 3 a.m.? My pulse quickened, but something wasn't right, so I let it go. I don't answer. I waited until it stopped. Finally, the humming ended. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. My heart pounded, probably more from surprise than anything else. I told myself it was a wrong call, maybe a drunk person or someone in a different time zone. I adjusted the blanket around me, hoping it wouldn't ring anymore. But it didn't stop immediately. About 2 minutes later, the phone rang again with an unfamiliar number. I wanted to ignore it, but it felt like the call wouldn't go away if I pretended not to hear it. Adrenaline is creeping into my system. I sat up and hit the answer button before my mind could snap me out of it. I didn't say anything at first, but I heard gasps on the other end. That was my first real fear. It wasn't heavy breathing like in a horror movie, but it was clear that someone was there. I still said nothing. Finally, I just said, "Hello." My ears sounded shaky. The breathing continued for a moment. Then the call was cut off. There were no words, just the sound of someone on the line and then a click. I felt chills all over my body. I've received a lot of wrong number calls in my life, but usually the caller will say something like, "Sorry, wrong number," before hanging up. This is different. I'm not sure why, but it makes me uncomfortable. This time I put the phone down again, rotated the screen to see if it would light up again. My eyes glanced at the clock. 3:05 a.m. Great, I thought. This is exactly what I need when I check out in a few hours. I tried to breathe slowly and reason. Maybe it was some random call in the middle of the night. Maybe they were bored. But then my phone rang again. This time I clicked the reply button immediately. I said, "Who is this?" I could hear something in the background, maybe the faint hum of the television or static. Then a voice whispered my name, clear as day, and hung up. I felt my skin crawl when I heard my name in that whispering voice. Feeling of being violated. This person knows exactly who I am. My heartbeat was pounding. I turned off the phone without thinking for a second. I don't want to risk it. If they have my number, they can text or call me anytime. But I don't know how they got it in the first place. I sat there for several minutes in the dark, listening to my own breathing. My palms were sweaty and my stomach was in knots. My mind raced with questions. Who would do something like this? Why do they do that? And how do they know my name? I stood up, walked into the small bathroom and splashed water on my face. The sink was cramped and had a cheap fluorescent light above it that buzzed. I stared at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. I looked stressed. I tried to calm down. I dried my face with a rough hotel towel and turned off the bathroom light. In the darkness, the main room felt heavier than before. When I got back to bed, I checked the door lock as I passed it. Safe. I also have a standard chain lock, the flimsy kind you see in hotel rooms. There were no strange noises from the hallway, no footsteps, no muffled voices. For a second, I considered going down to the front desk to complain, but what would I say? Someone called me 3 times and they whispered my name and I was scared? The receptionist would probably shrug, saying there's nothing they can do about random calls to my cell phone. I sat on the edge of the bed, raking my fingers through my hair, trying to figure out if I was overreacting. Then the phone in the room started ringing. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. The loud ringing cut through the silence like a loud alarm. I felt an instant sense of fear. I hope it's just the receptionist calling about some standard issue like credit card hold or payment time reminder. That might be a common explanation, but at 3 a.m. it seemed. I kept telling myself it must be the front desk. I picked up the receiver and cleared my throat. I said hello, my voice shaking. There was a pause just long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then a man's voice, soft but clear, said, "You're still awake." He knows. He knew I was in that room, awake and frightened. The hair on my arms stood up. I tightened my grip on the stethoscope. I didn't say a word. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding. My whole body felt hot and I could barely think straight. Who are they? They not only had my cell phone number but also the room extension, and they knew my name. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. I jumped out of bed and checked the door again. Still locked. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was dim with those dull standard hotel lights. I can't see anyone. Everything is still the same. I pressed my ear against the door for a moment, but I couldn't hear anything except the distant hum of the elevator. I yanked open the door and looked up and down the hallway. It was empty. The carpets were dark red. No one in sight. The hallway light flickered a bit. I felt a breeze from somewhere, probably the air conditioning system. I waited a few seconds, scanning every corner, expecting someone to jump out or rush around the corner. Nothing. I closed the door and then pushed a chair from the small table under the doorknob. It feels a bit silly, but I wanted an extra layer of security. I then went straight to the phone on the bedside table and dialed the front desk. A woman answered in a polite voice as if she had just woken up from a nap. I told her my name, my room number, and that I was getting strange calls. She paused, looking confused, and said, "We haven't made any calls to your department. No internal calls have come through our system, sir." That's all she said to me. Her voice was calm and slightly contemptuous, as if she was used to people calling at odd hours with odd complaints. I asked her if anyone was harassing the phone lines. She said no. I asked her to check if perhaps a guest had asked my name. She said no one had come to the table to talk about me. She offered to call security, but I guess I hesitated because I wasn't sure if that would make things worse or what else they could do. She said to let her know if it happened again, but otherwise she advised me to lock the door and let her know in the morning if there was a bigger problem. I hung up the phone, feeling a chill in my stomach. It was 3:20 a.m. At that moment, I turned on the small lamp on the table near the TV, bathing the room in a dim yellow light. I turned off all the other lights so I could see the peephole better if anyone walked by. The dark corner of the room made me uncomfortable, but I forced myself to look around carefully. I checked under the bed, opened the closet, and closed the shower curtain. There were no signs of forced entry, No footprints, nothing unusual. I sat in a chair next to a small table, eyes glued to the door. My phone was off, which brought me some relief but also a feeling of isolation. If something is really wrong, I need to turn it back on or use the phone in the room. As the minutes passed, my entire body felt tense. My muscles are tense. My skin was drenched with sweat. I kept wiping my palms on my pajama pants. Every time the air conditioner turned off, I felt like I could hear footsteps in the hallway. Then it would keep running and the hum would cover everything again. I tried to think who would have my phone number to know which room I was in. Could it be someone at work trying to pull a messy joke? No reason. They wouldn't do something like that at 3 a.m., and how did they get the room phone number too? Whispering my name sounded so personal, it didn't sound like any of my coworkers. I ran through the possibilities in my head, but nothing seemed right. Finally, I decided to at least try to get some sleep, even though I knew it was just daydreaming. I checked the door lock again and went back to bed. I still leave the light on. I lay on the blanket, thinking that if I needed to latch the door, I wouldn't be in the way. My heart rate finally started to slow down a bit. I kept glancing at the silent phone, half expecting it to ring again. If that's the case, then I have no other plan than to respond and tell that bastard to leave me alone. But the phone doesn't ring anymore. The next few hours passed in a strange state of half-sleep and half-awakeness. My body felt exhausted, but my mind refused to shut up. The image of the phone glowing in the dark kept repeating in my thoughts. The whisper of "you're still awake, won't leave me." I felt so restless that the smallest creak startled me. I remember the strange pattern of the air conditioner turning on and off about 3 more times before I noticed the first signs of dawn peeking through the thick curtains. At 6 a.m., I've had enough. I turned on the overhead light, pulled my clothes out of my suitcase, and got dressed. My hands trembled. I stuffed my things into my bag without bothering to fold them. My mind was determined to leave that place as soon as possible. I don't care about missing out on the free breakfast or staying until I pay. I just want to go. I remember that I could barely concentrate on simple tasks like zipping my bag. I kept looking around, waiting for another call. Finally, I walked out into the hallway. The lights seemed brighter than at night. A cleaning van was parked near one of the far rooms. A uniformed housekeeper was moving slowly from door to door. She barely glanced at me. I got into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and just stared at the closed doors until they opened again. At the front desk, I told the lady from the night before that I wanted to check out. I'm not mad at her. I just want to leave. She tapped a few keys on the computer. She asked if everything was okay. I said no, I was getting some really disturbing calls. She nodded slowly but didn't ask for more details. She said she was sorry I had a bad experience. She gave me the receipt and that was that. No one seems to care much. Stepping out of those sliding glass doors and feeling the morning air on my face was a relief. I threw my bag into my car and locked the door. I just sat there for a few seconds breathing, my mind filled with everything that happened during the night. My phone is still off. I turned it on, half expecting to see a bunch of texts or missed calls from that strange number. But there was nothing. It was like it never happened. All the way home, I kept playing the whispers, and the phone ringing still rings in me to this day, especially the moment when I heard my name. This is not a ghost story, I know that. No shadows passed through the room. No unexplained movements. No supernatural nonsense. It's just that someone took my name, my cell phone number, and the hotel room extension. It makes me very uncomfortable when someone intentionally violates my privacy in a place where I should feel safe at night. I never found out who that someone was. I tried asking around for a while, later asking people at work if they had called or if they knew someone in that city. Who admits anything? I never received another call like that. It was a one-time thing, but it bothered me for a long time. That feeling still bothers me personally in a way that random jokes don't. Maybe the person was just bored or thought it was funny. Maybe they accessed the hotel's reservation system. I do not know. I know that since that night, I'm especially careful with my personal information when I travel. I don't tell people where I live. I try to use a different name when checking in whenever possible, or at least I'm cautious about who knows my room number. And I almost never receive unknown calls in the middle of the night. Memories are sometimes too raw.